Welcome to another episode of the Meeting Space podcast, and I am super excited as I have my guest here, Brandt Krueger. Hello, Brandt. How are you?
Hello. I am doing fine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for your flexibility and willingness to meet with me and chat about a very important topic, what I think is a very important topic. We will be chatting about cybersecurity in virtual and hybrid meetings. But before we jump in, I wanted to introduce you with some of your background, as you are a technical producer and consultant. You are based in Minneapolis, so you are very cold right now. And you are also an instructor for the Event Leadership Institute's Virtual Event and Meeting Management certificate course. Those are quite credentials. Congratulations on that. But please tell us, how did you start in the event technology sector? How did you become an expert in that field?
That's probably a longer story for another day, but I'll try and condense it. But the long and the short of it is, I came originally from a theater background, coming out of college, and had a job working at a theatrical rental store so they did lights and curtaining and things like that. And for stories that are even more not worth going into, I was asked to leave that company. But I took one name out of the Rolodex, who was this kind of crazy old hippie with, really long gray hair, who did sound and lights forever for rock and roll shows, but more recently had been doing sound and lights for corporate events. And I asked if I could, come work for him, doing just, regular or occasional corporate event gigs, and did that for a while, and eventually wound up connecting with a meeting and event production company here in Minneapolis, and wound up working for the next 18 years. So it was probably very fortuitous that I got asked to leave that company and hooked up with Pete because the rest, as they say, is history. So yeah, I worked for the meeting and event production company for about 18 years, and then I have been out on my own doing consulting and education for about 6 years now. So over 20 plus years in the industry. It's a little frightening to say. I distinctly remember saying, I'm going to give this events thing, I'll give it about 5 years, and we'll see how it goes. And here we are.
Don't we all say that, right? I can so relate to your story, kind of. Yeah, I will just get an internship in the hotel, and then 17 years later, I ended my hotel sales career to move to the other side, and here I am. So I think that as event and meeting planners, we all have that commonality. Nobody is sane enough to say, "Oh, I will be event and meeting planner." We all kind of just stumble upon the career. Well, thank you for that synopsis of your story. I can see that you are, very influential in the events industry. I'm connected with you on LinkedIn. And I found you through an article where you are cited and interviewed on Event MB that is talking about cybersecurity for virtual and hybrid meetings. So I wanted to dive into that topic, if you don't mind, because I feel that with all the time that we spend in the virtual space, there is a lot of emphasis on content, marketing, audience engagement. But really, what can we do as event and meeting planners to keep the attendees safe and secure in that virtual space? What are the steps that we can take? So I wanted to start with that. What would be your first step if you were event and meeting planner to start layering that security for your virtual meeting?
Well, and the design and strategy and all that kind of stuff, that's obviously incredibly important. But and I love talking about that stuff too. But the cybersecurity side has been something that's been a passion of mine for a while now. And I'll talk to anybody who will let me about how we need to be doing a better job of protecting our attendees' data. And I think so. Thank you for letting me have that opportunity. I think. To take one step back, I think part of the problem is that a lot of planners and then people who don't self-identify as planners, so marketing folks, administrative assistants, the folks who wind up planning meetings but don't self-identify as I'm a meeting planner. A lot of the folks that are planning meetings and events, it feels like they believe that digital security is somebody else's problem. I'm sure that's being taken care of by, the guy in the glasses down the hall, right? That's being taken care of by somebody over there, or I'm sure it's being taken care of by my event app, and in the case of, online events and digital events by my vendor, by my platform that, I'm sure it says on the website, they've got military grade encryption, so it must be okay. And what I'm really trying to emphasize to people is that that's not where people are breaking in. That's not where the problem is. The problem is with us. Again, those of us who are the suppliers in the industry, the AV providers, the planning companies, the third-party planners, the internal planners, the folks that are actually planning these meetings, because we're the ones that are the gatekeepers to our attendees' data. So I think, there's this, again, so they're thinking it's somebody else's problem. Who cares if my data gets hacked, right? Who cares if, so somebody gets my credit card, no big deal, whatever, I'll figure it out. We're not talking about credit card data. We're not talking about things like that. What we're talking about is a different kind of gold, a different kind of value. The data that we protect for our attendees is tremendously valuable to bad actors. We're talking about names, email addresses, work email addresses, sometimes personal email addresses, phone numbers frequently, home addresses, titles, all of these things, just the basic level of registration. But then in an effort to be more customized, to be more engaged, we're adding all this other stuff into our registration, like what's your favorite type of coffee, all of these other things to make our events more personalized. And there's even more gold when it comes to our in-person events. And so, taking another step back, because we're going to go back to in-person events at some point. I mean, I know we're digital focused now, but when we look at our in-person events, now you're dealing with flight schedules, spouse names, hotel reservations, transportation reservations, So what that data allows is now taking everything I just talked about. You can craft a perfect what's called phishing email or even spear phishing email. So phishing email, you're just, trolling out there trying to catch people. Spear phishing is targeted. And so imagine, it's not too hard talking about what I just went through. Imagine now you're the CFO of a major corporation, Fortune 500 company. Your event is approaching and you receive an email that says, hello, Ms. Smith. We just want to confirm your limo that's going to be meeting you at the airport. We see your flight comes in at 8:15. The limo driver will be waiting for you. If all of these plans look good, click here to confirm. Click here to confirm, boom, they're owned, So it's these targeted, very realistic looking emails called spear phishing that is the true danger. So hackers aren't coming in the front door anymore. They're not, coming in and trying to get through the firewall and all the stuff that we see in television. They're coming in through the side door. They're using these side channel. Side channel is not that's a very specific thing. So forget I said that. But they're using these sideways attacks. So when Home Depot was hacked, when Target was hacked, they weren't hacked through the front door. They were hacked through a vendor. Home Depot was hacked through their point of sale credit card vendor, and Target was hacked through an HVAC, their air conditioning vendor, that just happened to have a little bit too much access to their network. So we're that side door. So as people are looking at where do I get this information so that I can target these emails and things like that, they're looking to us. And so it's really important that we start thinking about our attendees' data as being that gold, as being that valuable data that it is. And then we can start to do something about it, which is, I know, what your original question was.
No, this is great explanation, because I will be honest with you. I thought that it's the credit card numbers. It's the, that somebody can steal my identity, that is the threat. But what I am getting from what you are describing, it's literally what I had in mind. And this might sound so silly, but like in Home Alone, when those two thieves are sitting on the side of the road, just watching and gathering the data on just the most usual stuff that the family is doing or not doing. That's what hackers, that's what that data provides to hackers, to then, like you said, customize that email that it looks so realistic that you have no other option than just click, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's exactly where my reservation is. That's exactly what I told my assistant to do. Let me just confirm it. So the explanation is super useful, at least to me, and I hope that our listeners will find it useful as well, to give them an idea how important those spreadsheets really are, where you keep all that info. So
Magdalena, it's a good analogy. The Home Alone analogy actually is a good one, because and that just shows that this is nothing new, right? What criminals are doing, this is what they've been doing. They're casing the joint, right? Mm-hmm. They keep an eye, and a lot of these attacks, once they get in, so now that they're in, they do more of that. So once that person has clicked on that email and they're in their network, they just sit there and they watch what's going on, and they see what's going on in that company for even longer before they actually start doing something. They're playing the long game here. So it's actually a good analogy.
Well, awesome. Wow, look at me. Now I will call myself cybersecurity expert, making the analogy to Home Alone. So, when you mentioned that already, but that's when I read in the article on Event MB that what you're talking about, that far too often people are looking for it to be taken care of by vendors, by the event app, by the platform, and they are not taking responsibility for the cybersecurity. First step is awareness that you are just as responsible for it as the guy next door in the IT department or in the tech department. So what would be the next step that you would suggest?
Well, we have to start rigging some paint cans on ropes so that we can swing them and hit the bad guys in the head.
Yes.
It's sort of that level. Obviously I'm kidding, but it's sort of that level, right? We have to take some basic steps to start protecting ourselves. And, you can have your registration platform can have that military grade encryption, but it doesn't do any good if your password is monkey123. So step one, I always tell people, step number one is to start using a password manager. A password manager, that stores all of your passwords for you, so that you don't have to remember them all. It'll change your life. It really will. So step one, you won't have to remember all of those passwords. Step two, using a password manager enables you to use long randomized passwords. So they're going to be incredibly difficult to guess. So what bad actors do is when they get a list of passwords from an actual hack, they just add those to databases, and they add more and more and more and more and more. And you would be surprised how many people around the globe use monkey123 as their password. It's just something in our human brain that just makes us use that. Mm-hmm. Much less the ones that are just password 123, all of that kind of stuff. And so these databases contain gajillions of passwords in them. And so they're constantly checking. So anytime there's a new hack where they get new passwords, they check them against Gmail, Microsoft, Apple, all of the major banks to see if you've reused that password, because people who are having to remember their passwords aren't very good at not reusing them. We have a tendency to just make tiny little variants or add a 1, 2, 3 on the back end of it or something like that. So by enabling us to use a password manager to randomize those passwords, so even if one account gets hacked, it's not going to then get hacked everywhere else. They're not going to be able to use that password anywhere else. And you better believe, now that we're living in this digital world, they're not just checking against Gmail, Microsoft, Apple, and all the banks. They're checking against Gmail, Microsoft, Apple, all the banks, and Zoom. So they're going to be checking against these things, because once you start getting, access again to more and more people's data, then you can get deeper and deeper into other people's networks. And as larger players start to come into the registration market, or other platforms start to rise to the top, like Blue Jeans, like Google Meet, like Microsoft Teams, they're going to be, again, checking all of those passwords against it. So step number one, numero uno, top of the list, is get a password manager. I always get asked, well, what happens if the password manager gets hacked? Now they've got all my passwords. Well, theoretically, that's possible, but the good password managers don't even have access to your passwords, right? So you've got I forced myself to memorize a long randomized password for my password manager, so that's unlikely to get hacked. But then also, if I lose that password, they can't help me. I think they've got some one-time passwords that I printed out and have in a safe somewhere, that kind of thing. But, if somebody walked in the front door and stole their servers, they wouldn't be able to get access to my passwords. So as long as you're using one of the larger, more reputable password managers, that's not a problem.
And what comes to my mind here is, I have a Mac, so very often when I'm creating a new password, the suggested password will pop up, and it's like this super random sequence with some dashes. That's what you mean by password manager. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible for people who might be listening and cannot imagine what password manager is, that sometimes when you do have an Apple product, password manager is suggesting you some kind of randomized passwords already. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's part of it. That's absolutely part of it. I'll add two little caveats to that. So one, yes, all of the major browsers these days, whether it's Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Apple Safari, have built-in password managers at this point. And actually, the Apple Mac OS has some built-in password management as well. I don't actually recommend people to use that. So that's better than nothing. So that's okay. So it's not, you're not wrong to use it. It's better than nothing. But the problem is, again, if your Apple account does get hacked, they've got access to all of those passwords. If your Microsoft account gets hacked, they've got access to all those passwords. If your Google account gets, so it's more not putting all of your eggs in one basket, or whatever metaphor you want to use for that, by having my major accounts of Google, Microsoft, Apple, all separate with separate passwords contained in a third-party password manager, it's less likely that if any one of those happens to get hacked, then they've got everything.
Gotcha. Not to endorse one or the other, because obviously we're not getting paid for it. And
I'm still happy to do it if you want me to.
Yes, that's my next question is, what password manager would you recommend that checks all your boxes, since you are the expert?
I am happy to do that, and no endorsement, no paid promotion, but I am a fan of LastPass.
Okay.
It's relatively inexpensive. Honestly, I think it's $13 a year, something like that, for something that changes my life and I use daily. That's a pretty good deal. And I think the family plans and business plans then go up from there. But for an individual account, I'm pretty sure it's still pretty reasonable. It's been checked by security people that I trust, out there in the world. Like I said, people could walk in the front door, steal the servers, and take them. If a government or security entity wanted to subpoena that information, again, it wouldn't do them any good because they don't have my master password. So from that security standpoint, I think that's about the top level. I know that Dashlane is also a good one that a lot of people use. 1Password is another one that use. Those are kind of the top three that I can think of off the top of my head. You'd be fine with any one of them. For me personally, I endorse and recommend LastPass.
Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I will put that in also the notes in the episode. So whoever is listening, you will be able to have those names in the show notes. As I was reading through the article on EventMB, you do mention that the problem with the virtual event security breaches is that planners are kind of giving access to the throwing public URLs out onto the web and including all information completely publicly without any thought whatsoever to privacy or security. I would assume that the URLs you're talking about, those are the registration, the URLs for the virtual event. Talk a little bit about that, because I would like to clarify for the event planners what is acceptable to throw out there to the public. And on the other note, if they are posting the URL publicly, what can they do to protect that URL? That not just, some hacker schmo Joe can access the information. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure thing. I'll answer the second question first. What can they do to protect it? Nothing. If you put the link publicly, that means anyone in the public has access to the link. So, almost all of the quote unquote Zoom bombing that happened early on in pandemic lockdown was due to the fact that people were posting the Zoom link publicly. It's just a web link, so if you don't have a password on it and you don't have any kind of protection level on it, if you're posting the link publicly, anybody can use it. And at this point, there are just bots trolling the net looking for open Zoom links that are being posted, because some people really enjoy coming in and messing things up and swearing and saying horrible things and playing back horrible things on their computers. And I honestly thought we were done with that, after we got through those initial couple of months and the word kind of got out, hey, you got to put a password on your meeting, use the waiting room so that you can kind of check to see who's coming in. Zoom changed the defaults to make it so that you had to have a password. If you don't want one, you have to, go in and remove it. So Zoom changed some things on there and just to make it easier for folks to stay things locked down. But I just heard recently, within the last 2 weeks, a major meetings industry conference got Zoom bombed, and another meeting that the woman was on got Zoom bombed. So we either have a new round of people that don't know that this is a problem, or we've gotten lax in our being able to do it. But honestly, if you think about it, if you're posting the link publicly, anybody can use it. So you really do have to use either the built-in registration functions in Zoom, or, only send out that link via, emails, targeted emails to the people that you're using. The nice thing about using Zoom webinars or Zoom registration is that, it can assign it to specific people. And then you can tell if someone shared that link publicly, because all of a sudden there's a duplicate of them that comes in. So, you can at least tell who screwed up. And then communicating with your attendees, please do not post this link publicly. This link is specific to you. It is not meant to be shared. Anyone else who wants to join, we're happy to have you, but you have to register. So, this idea of Zoom bombing, unfortunately, they got a lot of bad press for it, and a lot of people got in their minds that Zoom was somehow insecure. But it wasn't that it was being hacked. It's just that the links were being posted publicly. And so what I'll tack on one more piece to this whole concept is the other thing to be wary of is the idea. There's these new websites that are kind of cropping up that will act as a pretty destination page for your event. And all you have to do is plug in your Zoom info and it'll make a nice page for you with graphics and things like that on the fly. Be a little wary of those, because anybody with some coding skills can throw something like that up. And then basically you're giving someone you don't know those links, right? And so there are kind of these little honeypot sites that are popping up, encouraging people to, hey, just give us your Zoom information. We'll make a nice splash page. If it's for free, you have to ask, how do they make their money? So just be careful. There are some legitimate sites that are doing this at a reasonable fee. So just be aware. Anytime something is free, actually this applies to password managers as well. So be careful with anything that's a free password manager. You have to ask, how are they making their money? It's kind of good advice for the internet in general. If something is free, you have to ask, how are they making their money? Because if it's free, then probably you're the product, or your data is the product. So be really wary when it comes to these kind of fly-by-night, just put in your Zoom information here and we'll make a splash page for it kind of products.
Wow, that's a great advice. That is an amazing advice. Thank you. I would never even think of asking the question, okay, so if you're doing this for free, how are you making money? To be kind of a qualifier for cybersecurity. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let's talk about useful. So okay, we covered, that it starts with us, password manager. What would be another thing that you would recommend as far as cybersecurity for event and meeting planners, or whomever wants to, keep their data at home more secure, because now everybody is working from home. So what would be your suggestion for somebody who, like me, works from home? I have a Mac, and I work for myself. I'm a consultant. What can I do to protect not only myself, but also clients that I'm working with, but I'm not on their VPN?
Well, you hit the keyword there, which is VPN. And so that was something that, again, even going back to our in-person events, was something that I recommended to folks. Of course, in that context, we were talking about hotel Wi-Fi and, coffee shops and things like that, that anytime you're on a public network, you should be doing all of your email, banking, all of that kind of stuff on a VPN. And just to clarify for any folks who might not be familiar with what that is, a VPN is just, it's a virtual private network. And so the easiest way to think of a VPN is a tunnel, an encrypted tunnel that protects your data from this point to that point somewhere else. And they originally came out in kind of the corporate world for people who were on the road. So I need to get back to the servers that are back at the corporate headquarters so I can access the marketing materials and those kinds of things. You have this VPN client running on your computer that creates this protected encrypted tunnel between where you're at and the corporate headquarters. And then I have access to all of the same resources that I would have if I was in the office. Now, people started taking that idea and expanding it a little bit to say, okay, well, if I can create it between here and the corporate headquarters, I can create an encrypted tunnel between here and anywhere, somewhere else. So as long as I have a server, a computer here in Minneapolis and a server in Istanbul, I can create a VPN between here and there, as long as those two are talking to each other properly. And so these more consumer grade VPNs started hitting the network, or hitting the net, that people could have these things. And what they were mainly used was for getting around location restrictions. So if I want to watch, the Netflix that they have in the UK, so I can catch up on all my Doctor Who episodes, I would create a VPN between here in Minneapolis and a server in the UK. And then as far as Netflix is concerned, I'm in the UK, and so therefore it gives me different, location restrictions. So those were gaining popularity. And so I was recommending that people use those when they're in their hotel rooms and things like that, just to get out of the hotel network. Once you hit the internet, you're open again, but you might as well just get out of that open hotel network, just in case there's somebody lurking there, hanging back in the background, just like we were talking again, inspecting that free and open Wi-Fi traffic. Now that people are moving home for remote and have been for several months, obviously, as I kind of said under the password manager section, attackers aren't coming in through the front door in these organizations. They're not trying to attack the networking infrastructure of IBM or, a Fortune 500 company. Now that everybody's at home, they don't have that big iron internet stuff to protect them. They don't have the corporate firewalls to protect them. And the bad folks know that. So they're attacking consumer level Wi-Fi routers and access points and, the Comcast, local, router that you get with your local cable company to get internet access. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're focusing their attention on. So take that VPN that you had installed on your computer for when you were traveling and go ahead and just start turning it on when you're at home as well. Just to give you, if you're working from home, if it's stuff that's important for you, it doesn't really hurt to have it on all the time anyway. And again, all you're doing is just creating a tunnel to get you out of the house, get you past that potentially vulnerable, router that you've got at your house, and then just get out into the internet where you're less likely to be targeted and inspected. Or if your company has an internal VPN, you can use that as well. But if you don't, at least use one of these consumer grades to, if you're accessing your registration platform, if you're accessing your, where your event platform is going to be. Anytime you're dealing with attendees' data, it probably would be a good idea to throw on a VPN just to get, get that tunnel out of your house, out of your neighborhood, and somewhere else on the internet before you're hitting it.
Well, what would be, again, not a paid promotion, not an endorsement, what would be a good VPN product for a small business like myself that I can install on my computer to protect not only my data, but my clients as well?
Yep. And much like the other things that we've been talking about before, watch out for the free ones, go for a nice top tier paid VPN. The one that I recommend is called ExpressVPN. There's a few others off the top of my head. I'm blanking though. But that is the one that I recommend. Again, vetted by security people that I trust. And also I'm pretty sure there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers vetting done of that they, what they say they're doing is in fact what they're doing. But more than that, the proof is in the pudding. Pretty sure it was actually in Turkey. They barged in and literally took the servers out of the data center because they were trying to track somebody down. And it was useless to them because they're encrypting the data. They're wiping the servers once they're done. So there's no logs of where you're going and what you're doing. Once again, if somebody walks in the front door and steals the servers, you're going to be protected and your data is going to be protected. So no third-party warrants, no bad actors are going to be able at least to hit them at that point in time. Okay. So ExpressVPN is the one that I recommend. Again, not terribly expensive for the value that you're getting out of it. I started using it when I was traveling a lot more. And I'll be honest with you, they've gotten so good at this technology. It used to be if it was on, it was really slow. It would slow down your internet quite a bit. But we're pretty well past that. I have forgotten to turn off my VPN and suddenly received, a Microsoft notification saying, hey, we just want to make sure because it looks like you're dialing in from the UK. Is this you? Oh, oops, I forgot to turn that off because they're so fast now. And you can stream high definition video, over these things now. So I wish I could remember a couple of the other ones off the top of my head, but unfortunately, we'll just have to go with ExpressVPN on that one.
That's awesome. No, thank you for that. I will definitely be looking into that again. Look in the show notes, folks, for some names of useful products. So, we have some password manager, VPN. What else? What else is out there that we can tie down that security? Of course, we do have, time restriction here. I want to be mindful of our recording time, but please throw some other ideas out there for the event meeting planners. I think, again, this topic for me should be top of mind for everyone. And I'm just super excited to have you. So I'm going to squeeze out as much information from you as I can.
It's okay. I've got a few more. We'll do kind of a lightning round as we start to wrap up here. But I think those are definitely my top two. So if you and the deeper you get, kind of the nerdier you get, and the more paranoid you get when it comes to security. So start with Password Manager if you do nothing else. Start playing around with VPNs. Those two are the easiest ones that almost anybody can do. From there, it starts to get a little nerdier, but I will throw out one, just being a little bit more aware of your data and who's got it and where it's going. And this is another one of those ones that I used to talk about more with in-person events, but has tracked through rather nicely into our online world. And that is just being aware of who you're giving your presentations to. I can't tell you that over these 20 years that I've been doing production, the number of times that I've been handed a thumb drive with very sensitive financial information on it, to take in the back and plug into a laptop. And so just thinking about that a little bit, I'm not saying we have to mistrust everyone on the AV team and get a waiver and a signed, NDA and all this kind of stuff. I think I've only signed one NDA in maybe two in those 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying we have to do that, but just thinking about it a little bit more so that, making sure that your audiovisual team, or in the case of online events, your digital platform, what's their data retention policy? How long so if you're providing them with something that has slides in it, or, you're providing on-demand content for your attendees afterwards, how long do they hang on to that after you're done with it? For the on-site side, do they wipe their computers between every event? So are you renting the laptops? What's their policies regarding wiping the machines every time? If you open up a rented laptop and it's got somebody else's show on it, I'd be really nervous about I would wipe my stuff off of there before I send it back, just to be sure, because it doesn't sound like they're wiping it in between shows. So paying attention to where your data goes, who's got it, going back to the idea of password managers, the number of times on site where I've gone up to a registration booth and seen somebody with a Post-it note with the password for the registration platform on it, just sitting there for anybody to see. So thinking about our staffing is kind of the next category of what I recommend to folks is who's got access to the data, how, why. One of the other advantages of a password manager is a lot of them will allow you to share passwords effectively from, this person to that person, and then they have to have a LastPass account. And then when you're done, you can revoke that access and easily change the password. So you've got more control and you're not having to give it to them on a sticky note. You're able to say, okay, set up a LastPass account. Great. I'm going to send you the password. You have access to the registration platform. And then when you don't need it anymore, I'm going to cut that off and take it back. I think I've got passwords from the company that I left 6 years ago still floating around, because I don't know if they work or not, but I had them, just because that's the way it was working. And so thinking about your staffing, thinking about who has access to what, a little more critically, I think is important, because you never know what a disgruntled employee might do, or even just someone walking by, backstage and just, I'll just take that USB stick with me and see what's on it. I also heard a hacker who was talking to a group of event people saying that he would litter the event space with USB sticks that had malware on it. Now, he was safe. He was making sure that nothing really bad would happen, but he just wanted to see who would pick it up and who would use it. And so literally just, look, a free USB key. Ooh, okay, I'll take that, put it in my pocket. And he would track who would open it and where they would open it and that kind of thing, and then report back to the event folks just to kind of say, hey, just so you know, this is happening, you might want to instruct people. So being aware of the staffing, who's got access to what, I think is another kind of more simple step that we can use. From there, you start getting more into into the technology side, into what can we do to actually, lock down Wi-Fi access points and things like that. Again, more on the in-person side. So I think what we've kind of covered today, I think we'll get through most of our digital events. But as we start to move back into in-person events, paying more attention to an open Wi-Fi versus a Wi-Fi that has a password. Even if the password is monkey123 for the Wi-Fi network, that is still more secure than having no password at all. And even if you print the password on every piece of paper associated with the conference, that is still more secure than having no password at all. So I always recommend that folks have a password on their Wi-Fi networks, not a punch in your hotel room number and that kind of thing. If you're seeing any kind of web page, splash page, other than that, like operating system level, please pop in the Wi-Fi password for this Wi-Fi network. If you're seeing anything other than that, it's not a protected network. It's not an encrypted network. So no hotel splash pages, nothing like that. No walled gardens. That's probably good enough for now. I could probably stretch to come up with a few more. There's always more things that we can be doing, but I think that probably covers most of the highlights.
And I will put in the show notes also the link to the article, because I think that there are some things that we will not have a chance to cover in the podcast today, but there are a few points that you are talking about in that article that might be also helpful to whomever is interested in kind of leveling up their security at the virtual event. And so thank you for that. And having you here as a, event technology expert, I cannot let you go without talking about the CES show, the biggest technology show, in the world, that takes place every year in January in Las Vegas. This year it was virtual. And just so listeners know, before we actually started chatting, Brandt and I, we just had a very casual conversation about it, because it was for the first time completely virtual. And as a event technology expert, I wanted to ask you, what did you have your eyes on as far as technology and the trends? I'm very curious to hear if you had something that you have been watching and was curious about. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Tell me, I'm very curious.
It was a very different vibe this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no two doubts about it. And I think even if it were if we had this exact same show in person, I think it would have been a more chill vibe even at that. But I mean, I think the reason it was more chill was because it was online. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. But it seemed most of the products that were announced were very iterative. It's just like the next generation of this, a newer version of that. We've seen rolling screens for a couple of years now. And so to now see a rolling scrolling phone is cool. Don't get me wrong. I love to see that technology is advancing. But that phone's not coming out tomorrow. It's we'll be lucky if it comes out in 2 years. They showed the rollable television sets, I think 2 years ago, and now good news, they're coming out for the low price of $86,000. So it's you have to take a lot of the CES stuff with a grain of salt anyway. Mm-hmm. It does feel like on a normal year, there's a lot more of those things that just kind of grab everybody's attention. That everybody who's there as press latches on to one or two things that is in every article. It didn't feel like there was that kind of buzz around any one or two products. There were a few that kind of tracked the scrolling rollable phones. There was a $3,000 pet door, like a Internet of Things connected digital pet door. There were some, like I said, it wasn't a whole lot. There's Cadillac announced a flying car. Okay, I'll believe it when I see it. Same kind of stuff, and that stuff's cool. But it just did not have the same buzz. So even completely setting aside whether or not they did a good job, it felt like a very down year, which may or may not have been due to companies deciding, well, we're just not going to throw any big announcements at this thing. The number of exhibitors was down. But if anything, there was an opportunity to hit a larger market. So one would think that they could have. But what I suspect is that the large companies are realizing they can just do it themselves. I don't need to go to CES to announce it. Samsung had their own individual event to announce their, whatever, Galaxy 21 or whatever it is. And Apple had 4 or 5 large online events. Microsoft had multiple online events. Microsoft did was the platform for CES this year. I heard good things. I heard bad things. You and I were talking before we hit record about, I guess there were some annoyances with people having to click through data waivers for every single vendor that was on there. And, that's not a failure of tech. It's just more they're people trying to stay within the spirit of GDPR, I'm sure, where, you have to have that data relationship with every single vendor rather than just a blanket, yes, I'm okay with talking to everybody. I don't think that you'd be allowed to do that under GDPR because my understanding is it has to be very specific and positive consent as opposed to blanket generic consent. So while annoying, sounds like that kind of had to be the case if people are coming in from all over the world potentially. But yeah, it's just nothing really big of like, oh, wow, I can't do. Now, what I will say that's fascinating to me is after CES last year, so 2020 CES, which was pretty much the last big tech conference before everything went into lockdown. In those few months, what was fascinating to me was listening to people who are not event people say, you know what, good riddance. I never want to go to a giant trade show again. My feet hurt. I would come home with the CES flu every year. Good riddance to giant tech expos. I never want to do it again. What's interesting to me is that there was enough dissatisfaction with this year's online CES. There was enough people that were like, yeah, that just didn't cut it for me, that now I'm starting to hear, I kind of can't wait to go back. And so I think if there's a silver lining to this year's CES, it's actually got people thinking about in-person events again in a positive way. Of like, what I miss? I miss seeing my colleagues. I miss seeing the people that I was only there once a year for to see. And so I'm really encouraged by that because it doesn't matter what we in the event industry think. It doesn't matter when we think we'll be back to in-person events and when we'll be doing more of them. It matters on so many other factors than what we want. And one of them is what do the attendees want? And I think, I find that really encouraging that I'm hearing non-event people kind of pining, kind of longing for that only a year ago they said they never wanted to do again. Right.
As you were speaking about that, I had in mind, our event industry, biggest event IMAX, and how people after IMAX are like, oh my gosh, never again. I don't want to do it. Too much walking. My feet hurt. Too much booze, too much food, too much everything. And IMAX canceled their, I think, Frankfurt event for the second year in a row because they couldn't have it in 2020. Now it looks like it's canceled in 2021. So if we go back to the in-person events by Q3, IMAX North America might be a very well attended with a lot of people who currently are in that state of mind of longing, seeing their colleagues, seeing their clients in person and shaking hands. I don't have an opinion yet if we will be back to, I'm just waiting, sitting back and waiting. No predictions here.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what we think. We just, I came off a webinar earlier or last week where we tried to be as open and honest about where things are going to go as we possibly could. And I think the overwhelming thing, kind of like I was just saying, it doesn't matter what we think. It's gonna be up to regulators. It's gonna be up to governments. It's gonna be up to individual locations. So there's not going to be a day where we just turn the switch and we're back to in-person events. It's gonna vary by location. It's gonna vary by country. It's gonna vary by company, where executives, may feel more comfortable or less comfortable sending someone to a different location. It's gonna depend on our destinations. It's gonna depend on our venues. It's gonna depend on our attendee feelings. Like I was just talking about, where, I personally had the opportunity to go someplace pretty cool in May, and we turned it down because I don't think we're going to be ready. And I'm not comfortable here, even this many months out, committing to something because I just don't know where we're going to be at. And so I think, people desperately want there to be a date. And, just look at the UK. The UK pretty much had set a date for when they were going to start opening things up. Now there's this new variant, and they had to go back into basically complete lockdown again. So, it's what I keep telling people is don't let this, when are we going to get back to normal question paralyze you. If you're planning events, you need to plan your events with the information that you have right now. And the longer you postpone that decision, is it going to be in person? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be hybrid? The longer you postpone that decision, you're taking days off the time to plan that event. So just make the decision, go with what you're going to go, know what your backup plans are. Right now, kind of the safest mode is to go hybrid. So you're working both angles. The tricky part about hybrid now, though, is you're basically planning 2 events. So it's a lot more work. You have to plan for 2 whole audiences and give them both a good experience. So either decide right now, we're going to go online, decide right now we're going to go hybrid, or decide right now we're going to go live or cancel, right? So if you choose we're going to go in person and with no backup plan and no online backup, then your alternative is cancel. But decide, don't let it keep lingering. Decide. The people who are looking like some of the smartest people in the room is Microsoft, who decided in June of last year that they weren't having any in-person events until June of this year. And at the time, I remember people going like, they're crazy. Why would they want to do that? They're looking awfully smart about now because it enabled them to pull all of their resources behind their online events, not having to worry about this little event in Italy and this little event, in South Asia and this little event here, pulling all of it together under one umbrella and saying, we're going online for the next year. Now we can focus on that.
Exactly.
And I think that's really, really smart. And I would not be surprised as we get closer to June, honestly, if they extend that a little bit, because I just don't think we'll be ready to go come June.
Yes, I'm with you on that. The waiting game seems to be adding even more frustrations for vendors, for any suppliers. Swift decision making is needed, and whichever way you're gonna go. Sitting kind of in the limbo is not it's just, to me personally, also is not a good strategy. When there is a moment to pause and kind of take a step back and reevaluate, fine. But it seemed that what Microsoft did is once the decision was made, just like you said, they were able to pull all the resources and focus on the strategy for their online meetings. What kind of event technology should event planners, meeting planners be watching for? Do you see any trends on more immersive virtual experiences? I'm just kind of hearing about that here and there. We all know and agree this is not a brand spanking news, that nothing will substitute in-person events. We know that. But what kind of technology can bring us maybe a little bit closer to that feeling? Do you have any predictions, trends that you are seeing and can talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably another thing we could spend an entire hour on. But in the interest of your listeners' time, we'll try and start to I don't know, bring the cows back in the barn, bring the train back in, whatever metaphor you want to use. We'll start to wrap this up. What I tell folks is, when this started 10 months ago, roughly, when we really started going into lockdown, there were really only 4 or 5 incumbent online event platforms. And since then, we've just had an explosion of them with people that are pivoting or brand new. And that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of them are really good. So, obviously, anytime something's brand new, you probably don't want to be the first person to do it. You want to get somebody else to kind of work out the kinks. But they've also now had 10 months to start working out the kinks. And so I keep telling folks that, we've advanced more in the last 10 months than we have in the last 10 years when it comes to our online and digital events. So the technology is evolving at an incredibly rapid pace, but much like our event apps were, when we were doing more in-person events. So just think about your event apps that are out there. So, you've got it on your phone and you've got your agenda, maybe you've got the map of the convention center, who's speaking, all of that kind of stuff, some bios. Maybe there's some, connection activities where I can connect to other attendees. Maybe there's, some Q&A or polling capabilities, way to push notifications, all of these things. No matter which event app you chose, 80% of that would be there. But that 20% that's different is where the important thing is. So you would be able to choose any of those event apps and be mostly okay. Your attendees would have a schedule and all that kind of important stuff that's kind of table stakes for event apps. But finding out that 20% that's different and lining that up to the 20% that's different about your event, because 80% of our events are kind of the same, especially when it comes to meetings and conventions and things like that. They've got a very regular flow with, there's an opening session and then we go to breakouts and then there's a lunch and then there's a social thing at the end of the night, very similar setups. 80% of the meetings tend to be kind of the same. So lining up your 20% with their 20% is where the magic happens. Uh-huh. So similarly, now we've moved on to online, right? You've got those kind of 5 incumbents that were doing online events before, and now a couple hundred upstarts and pivots in the industry. 80% of it's going to be the same, right? You've got the ability to do video and audio, and maybe you can do the Brady Bunch thing where you've got multiple people in the boxes, and maybe you can do a chat, and maybe you can do Q&A, and maybe you can do polling, and also then have your agenda and multiple tracks. So 80% of what these platforms can do is going to be okay, right? It's going to get you what you need. And so really, you could choose any of them and be okay. But finding that 20% then that's different is because a lot of these companies pivoted from doing something else, chances are they've got to focus something that they were doing before. So I was looking at an online platform for digital events, and they really seem to be focusing on the content. How do we deliver PDFs and, the on-demand video, all of that kind of stuff really seemed to be like in their field of vision, like really in their focus. Sure enough, I went back and looked at what they were doing pre-pandemic, and they were mostly content delivery. It was for marketing materials and things like that. So finding out what they did before they pivoted and added a video chat capability frequently will help you determine what that 20% is. And then again, that's where the magic is. What's different about your group, your event? What are your needs other than it's got chat, it's got polling, it's got video, it's got audio. We need to be able to play back video. Mm-hmm. So really finding that is kind of how you start to line things up, and that's where the magic is.
Very awesome. That is a very diplomatic answer, I must say. Thank you so much, Brandt. This has been an amazing hour that you have spent for the listeners of the Meeting Space podcast. I have learned a lot. Thank you very much. And I will definitely be looking forward to more of your articles coming up. As a shameless plug-in, please let our listeners know how they can find you, where they can find your writings.
The easiest way is to actually just go to BrandtKrueger.com, BrandtKrueger. And BrandtKrueger.com is where you can find out most links to pretty much everything that I'm doing. And I'm also on all the socials. Nice thing about having a very fixed Germanic name like that is I usually get my name on LinkedIn and Twitter and all those kinds of things. So so I'm pretty much Brandt Krueger on all the things. So hit me up on LinkedIn, hit me up on Twitter, or just, stop by the website, and that's where you can find out what's going on with me. And then Event Leadership Institute, which you touched on at the very beginning. We've been doing the class on virtual event meeting management. It's been an absolute blast. Really one of the high points of my career has been being part of the journey of so many planners at this point. We've had over 2,000 people have taken that class so far, and it's been an absolute privilege to be a part of their journey as they learn the basics of how to do virtual events and online events, and not just the basics, but then the strategy and design and things like that behind it as well. So that's where folks can find out more about me. Shameless plug. End.
That's awesome. Thank you. I will definitely put your website in the show notes so people can easily find you and go to your website. Again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And hopefully you can come back in a few months to the Meeting Space podcast and tell us a little bit more about your adventures in event technology world and what is out there. And hopefully we will be in the new circumstances. Who knows, right?
Who knows? Exactly.
Thank you, Brandt.
My pleasure.